A voice in the crowd broke the steady hum of the city's evening rush. The sun was setting behind the skyline, casting a warm glow over the bustling streets where people moved purposefully, too absorbed in their own worlds to notice much around them. Isaiah, a young black boy with dust-smeared cheeks and an outstretched hand, stood quietly on the corner. He had learned not to expect much, maybe a few coins or a bit of leftover food. He had long since trained himself to ignore the ache of hunger and the sting of dismissive looks. His makeshift bed, a battered piece of cardboard, was tucked under his arm as he moved through the crowd, barely noticeable, nearly invisible. His voice had grown hoarse from a day of quietly calling out, and each minute left him a little more worn. As he scanned the faces passing by, he spotted a well-dressed woman. Her clothes shimmered under the dimming sky, and rings sparkled on her fingers as she adjusted her handbag. Isaiah felt a glimmer of hope. "Please, ma'am," he murmured, stepping forward with outstretched hands. "Just a few coins for food. It's been days since I've eaten." The woman's gaze landed on him with a look that bordered on contempt. She pulled back, disgust etched on her face, as if his mere presence had tainted her evening. "Don't touch me, you filthy thing," she snapped, recoiling. "This coat costs more than you'll see in your miserable life." Isaiah felt his shoulders sink, but he held his ground, though his hands trembled slightly. "Please," he whispered, "I can work, clean your car, anything, just something to eat." But his plea only deepened her disdain. She raised her voice, her tone dripping with derision. "Work? Just look at you, dirty, stinking, and probably crawling with lice. People like you just want to beg and steal from decent folks like me," she sneered. People began to stop and stare, some pulling out their phones to capture the scene. Isaiah's heart pounded, and his hand instinctively moved over his growling stomach. But he didn't want to show weakness. "Not now. You don't know me," he said, his voice soft but laced with a courage that surprised even him. He looked around at the faces, eyes filled with shame but refusing to let his head drop. "You have no idea what I've been through or why I'm here." The woman's glare sharpened, her voice cutting into him. "You probably tried to rob me, didn't you? Kids like you are all the same, part of some gang." "No doubt." Isaiah's cheeks burned, and he blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. He stumbled back as the woman's words bore into him, piercing through the thin walls he'd built around himself. Just then, a deep, steady voice cut through the crowd. "Enough." Isaiah looked up, and the crowd turned toward the source of the voice, a tall man, elegantly dressed, with a calm yet intense expression. The woman faltered, flustered by the stranger's interruption. "I was just trying to teach him a lesson. These beggars need to know their place," she muttered. The man ignored her and walked toward Isaiah, his gaze softening as he took in the boy's exhausted appearance. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded bill and placing it in Isaiah's hand. Isaiah's eyes widened. It was more money than he'd ever held at once. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The man nodded, glancing back at the woman with a piercing gaze that silenced her. "Today," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you've shown everyone here who you really are." The man turned back to Isaiah, smiling softly. "Take care of yourself," he murmured before disappearing into the crowd. As Isaiah watched him go, something in him shifted, a small flicker of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. That night, Isaiah found a spot beneath a bridge, clutching the bill tightly. The man's kindness had stirred something in him, filling him with an unfamiliar mixture of fear, hope, and anticipation. He felt as though he was standing on the edge of a new path, though he couldn't yet see where it would lead. As dawn broke, he got up, his mind whirring with ideas. For the first time, he thought about something other than just surviving. Later, he passed by a bakery where he'd seen people walk in and out with pastries and bread. The delicious aroma was almost dizzying, and he was just about to step inside when a voice hissed from behind him. "Don't even think about it." Isaiah turned, spotting another street kid his age. Isaiah stood on the street corner, wrapped in a torn coat, clutching the bill Simon had given him. He looked up in surprise as a girl with weary eyes and a guarded demeanor approached him. Who are you? He asked cautiously. The girl crossed her arms. Name's Tasha, and if you know what's good for you, you'll stay away from places like this. Isaiah frowned, confused. I just wanted to buy something to eat. Tasha scoffed, her tone dripping with a mix of experience and skepticism. Not here. You won't. These fancy places call the cops the second they see someone like us. Trust me. She gave him a once-over and smirked. You're new to this. Huh. Isaiah hesitated, feeling his cheeks flush. I've been on the streets for a while, if that's what you mean. Tasha shook her head, her expression softening slightly. Nah, I mean new to surviving out here. She nodded toward the bill in his hand. Someone gives you a big bill, and you think you can walk into a bakery like you belong here. Doesn't work that way. Isaiah's face burned with embarrassment, but he knew there was truth in her words. He had been so eager. He hadn't thought about how people might react. Tasha softened further, gesturing down the street. There's a food cart a few blocks away where they won't look twice at you. Come on. The two of them weaved through narrow alleyways until they reached a quieter part of town. A small food vendor stood by a cart, serving sandwiches. Isaiah ordered one, and the two sat by a fountain to eat. Between bites, Isaiah glanced at Tasha. Why'd you help me? She shrugged, chewing thoughtfully. Someone helped me once. Figured I'd pay it forward. But don't get used to it. Out here, people smile at you one minute, then take everything you've got the next. Isaiah absorbed her words, feeling the weight of them. What should I do then? He asked quietly. You make a plan, she said, meeting his gaze. You get smart, lay low, and find a way off these streets. She looked up at the sky, her voice softening. This life isn't for anyone, but if you're stuck here, you learn fast. Isaiah felt something stir within him, a quiet resolve he hadn't realized he had. That day, Tasha showed him places where shopkeepers wouldn't kick him out, shortcuts through alleyways, and quiet spots where he could sleep undisturbed. As they walked, Isaiah couldn't help but think about Simon, the man who had given him the money. His face lingered in Isaiah's mind, a reminder of the kindness he'd found in a stranger. One evening, while waiting for Tasha near the park, Isaiah spotted a familiar figure, a man in a tailored suit with a purposeful stride. It was Simon. Isaiah's heart pounded as he watched, unsure whether to approach. Then he noticed Tasha lurking nearby, her eyes fixed on Simon. Slowly, she slipped through the crowd, reaching into her coat. Isaiah's pulse raced as he caught the glint of a small, sharp blade. Without thinking, Isaiah darted forward and grabbed her arm. Tasha, don't, he hissed. Tasha spun around, startled. We could take his wallet and be set for days, she argued, her voice low but urgent. Isaiah shook his head, his voice firm. This isn't the way. He's a good person. He helped me. Tasha stared at him, disbelief and anger flickering in her eyes. But something in Isaiah's tone made her pause. With a sigh, she slipped the blade back into her pocket. Fine, but don't expect people like him to save you again, she muttered before storming off. Isaiah felt a mix of guilt and relief as he turned back. To his surprise, Simon was looking directly at him, his expression calm but questioning. Are you all right? Simon asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Isaiah nodded, though his voice trembled. Thank you. I was just passing by. Simon extended his hand. I'm Simon. And you are? Isaiah, he replied, shaking Simon's hand. Simon's expression softened. I've been looking for you. Isaiah, I wanted to see if you were all right. Isaiah's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever looked for him before, let alone someone like Simon. Before he could respond, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. The window rolled down, revealing a woman with cold, piercing eyes. There you are. Simon, she said sharply. Are you done with your little stroll? Simon's face hardened, but he kept his voice calm. Yes, Amelia. I was just talking to a friend. Her gaze shifted to Isaiah, filled with disdain. Friend? I don't know why you waste time with people like him. Isaiah felt a familiar pang of humiliation, but forced himself to stand tall. Simon turned to her, his voice steady but firm. Amelia, that's enough, he said. a hint of anger in his tone. Then he looked back at Isaiah, his eyes filled with apology. "I'm sorry," Simon whispered. Isaiah managed a small, grateful smile. He wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, he knew Simon's kindness wasn't just a fleeting act. It was a beacon, guiding him towards something better. Face filled with cold disdain. "You're nothing," she spat. "No one will believe you over me." Isaiah felt the sting of her words but stood firm. He straightened his shoulders, locking eyes with her. "I may not have much, but I have the truth," he said, his voice unwavering. "And that's more powerful than you think." Simon stepped forward, holding the incriminating documents in his hand. "This isn't about who Isaiah is. It's about what you've done. Amelia, your greed, your manipulation. It ends now." Amelia's confidence faltered for the first time. She looked between Simon and Isaiah, her lips tightening as though calculating her next move. "You think this will stop me?" she hissed. "I've covered every angle. No court will believe you, Simon, especially if this boy is your so-called witness." Simon's calm exterior cracked, his voice rising with anger. "Enough, Amelia. For years, I've let you control my life, but no more. Isaiah has done more for me in a few days than you ever have in a lifetime. And now, the world will see who you truly are." Isaiah stepped beside Simon, his small frame radiating a quiet strength. "You underestimated me," he said, his words directed at Amelia. "But what you don't see is that people like me, we don't give up. Simon deserves to be free, and I won't let you take that away from him." Amelia's eyes narrowed, her anger bubbling over. "You'll regret this," she spat, turning on her heel and storming out of the room. The sound of her sharp heels echoed through the mansion as she disappeared into the night. Simon let out a deep breath, the weight of the confrontation lifting slightly. He turned to Isaiah, his expression a mixture of gratitude and relief. "You were incredible," Simon said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Isaiah shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to. You gave me a chance when no one else would. I just wanted to return the favor." Over the following weeks, Simon used the evidence Isaiah and Tasha had gathered to take legal action against Amelia. With the help of his lawyers and the support of Isaiah's testimony, Simon managed to regain control of his assets and his life. Simon made good on his promise to help Isaiah too. He offered the boy a safe place to stay, proper meals, and the chance to go to school. For the first time in his life, Isaiah had a roof over his head and a sense of stability. Tasha, skeptical at first, eventually came around. Simon extended his kindness to her as well, offering her opportunities to leave the streets behind. Though wary, Tasha began to trust that maybe, just maybe, there were people who truly cared. One afternoon, as Isaiah sat in Simon's garden, he reflected on how far he had come. The cardboard box he once called home was a distant memory. Now, he had a future to look forward to, a future filled with possibilities he never dared to dream of. Simon joined him, a cup of tea in hand. "You know," Simon began, his tone light, "if it weren't for you, I might still be stuck in that web of lies Amelia spun." Isaiah grinned, his eyes bright. "If it weren't for you, I might still be out there on the streets. I guess we both saved each other." Simon nodded, a thoughtful smile spreading across his face. "Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact. You reminded me of that, Isaiah." As the sun set over the mansion, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Isaiah felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. He had found not just safety, but a family, a connection that reminded him that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. And for Simon, the boy he had once seen as a stranger had become a beacon of light, showing him the way out of the shadows that had consumed his life. Together, they proved that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. As Amelia was escorted out, her piercing gaze fixed on Isaiah, brimming with contempt, he held his ground, unflinching. Her fury no longer held the power to shake him. The echoes of her sharp heels faded down the hallway, leaving a tense silence in the room. Simon turned to Isaiah, his expression softening as gratitude shone in his eyes. I couldn't have done this without you, Simon said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Isaiah looked up at him, a small but genuine smile breaking across his face. You saved me first, Simon. I just repaid the favor. Simon placed a hand on Isaiah's shoulder, his warmth and sincerity cutting through the tension that still lingered in the air. If you're willing, Simon said carefully, I'd like to help you find a new path, a fresh start. Isaiah's heart raced. For so long, his life had been about mere survival, about making it to the next day. Now, here was someone offering him something he'd never dared to dream of, a chance to truly live. He nodded, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. I'd like that. Together, they stepped out of the mansion into the cool night air. The breeze carried with it the scent of rain, clean and refreshing, as if the world itself was starting anew. Isaiah breathed deeply, his lungs filling with the promise of change, of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt the heavy weight of his past beginning to lift. He had faced darkness, betrayal, and fear, but he had emerged stronger. And now, with Simon by his side, Isaiah was ready to embrace a future filled with possibilities, a future where he could finally step into the light.